I'm David Culver in Wuhan, China.
CNN Seoul.
Hong Kong.
Istanbul.
In Athens, Greece.
In Copenhagen, Denmark.
In London, and this is CNN.
This powerful day of coverage will reveal the global nature of the crisis and the growing movement to end it.
When you bring people together, it gives all of us strength.
Hashtag My Freedom Day, March 11 on CNN.
I am Iván Pérez Sarmiento in Buenos Aires, and this is CNN.
Welcome back to State of the Union. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it has launched another wave of missiles and drones on countries across the Middle East. This comes after Israel's defense forces said it had killed 40 senior Iranian commanders, calling it a historic strike. Here with me now, David Sanger of the New York Times, CNN's Natasha Bertrand, and CNN political analyst Barak Ravid of Axios. Starting here at the table, David, I want to start with you because you wrote in a great New York Times piece this morning that President Trump has embarked on the ultimate war of choice.
Right. There was nothing, Donna, that forced him to act and act now. There was no imminent nuclear threat. He had actually neutralized a good deal of that back in June when he hit Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. And most of the nuclear fuel that is closest to bomb grade is buried at Isfahan, and there's been no evidence that anyone was digging it up. His claim that they were soon going to have missiles that could reach the United States is contradicted by his own Defense Intelligence Agency, which reported last year that they were probably a decade away from having something intercontinental. They can certainly reach American bases, American allies in the region. That's been true for a long time. And there was no imminent threat. So the question is, why did he choose to go do this now? And I think the answer, which I think you touched on talking to Senator Coons before, was this was a remarkable moment of weakness for the Iranians, politically, economically, certainly militarily. He saw his chance. The CIA, came in with intelligence about where they'd been tracking the supreme leader, and they've been sharing that with the Israelis. But the fact of the matter is that he did not need to go do this, and wars of choice are illegal under the UN Charter. They're illegal by most international law unless you have an imminent threat.
And I think that's where we're going to see the legal justifications start to take shape, and we already saw it starting to take shape yesterday. In a call with reporters, administration officials said the Iranians had missiles essentially pointed at U.S. bases and U.S. forces, and they were prepared to use them preemptively. And so we had to take action first to take out these missiles, take out the launchers to prevent a mass casualty incident. We're told that that is not true, that the Iranians actually, there was no intelligence to support the idea that the Iranians were going to take a first strike against the U.S. or against Israeli assets unless the U.S. and Israel. But, of course, going back to your point, they need a justification not only, under international law, but also to lawmakers who are potentially coming back to the Hill this week to vote on a war powers resolution. to say that the U.S. was under imminent threat, that there was an imminent attack coming, and so they had to act quickly.
Barak Ravid, you spoke with President Trump yesterday. He floated the idea of off-ramps, but he also said he was willing to go long. How do you read that?
I think I read that as President Trump sending a message to whoever is left in the Iranian leadership that this operation or this military campaign could end within days if his conditions are met, or it could last much longer. I think the U.S. military has been preparing for a multiple-week campaign. It could also end, the first segment of the plan is 5 days. So it could end sometime around Tuesday. But that's only the first segment. There are other segments afterwards, but President Trump will have to decide whether he wants to go to the second segment or not. I think that's what President Trump was trying to say.
Barak, you have incredible sources in the region. What are you hearing about the state of war as we speak?
I think the main question right now is, and we got to this point much faster than in June, because the opening strike was so consequential that, taking out Khamenei and his top advisors. But right now, I think we are in the state of sort of a war of attrition. On the one hand, Israel and the U.S. will try to take out as many rocket launchers as they can to try to degrade the Iranian ability to continue firing at Israel and at the Gulf states. And on the other hand, the Iranians will try to overwhelm the defense systems in the region, continue on blocking the Strait of Hormuz, and the question will be who will be more effective. I think that's what we're going to see in the next few days.
Yeah, which is the definition, David Sanger, of what happens in a war, whether it's a couple of days or even longer. And one of the questions that Nick Payton-Walsh was posing, which is one of the many good ones, is if the leadership is gone, who is now in charge? Who is calling for these missiles to be launched at Israel and other U.S. allies in the region?
Well, before this all happened, as the U.S. built up its forces in the region, the Iranians developed succession plans that went down several layers. And I think that's because they learned the bitter lesson in June when they lost many of their leaders. So we're now about to go find out if their succession plan really works. But for President Trump, he has actually laid out something far more ambitious here. Tactically, yes, he's got to take out all those launchers that we just heard Barak talk about. But politically now, he's got to figure out how to engineer a regime change that is friendly to us. And as you were discussing earlier, it's hard in history to find a single example where a regime change has been brought about, certainly one friendly to us, by air power alone. So the president might just suspend his goal and say, I gave the opening to the Iranian people and they didn't take it, or he may keep going until he gets the result he wants.
Well, I mean, his stated goal is peace in the Middle East. I mean, that's a very lofty goal.
To say the least, yes. I mean, look, I think that the U.S. military, obviously they had been preparing for this for weeks. Obviously, there were plans in place to conduct an overwhelming attack that did the immediate thing, which was to help the Israelis get rid of those Iranian senior leaders. But we're told that the U.S. intelligence community actually did not have a good idea prior to this of what would come next if the regime was deposed. Unlike in Venezuela, where they had a good idea of who would take over once Maduro was ousted, they didn't have a really good idea of the kind of organizational chart of how this would play out in terms of who would then take power. And so that's what made this additionally risky, is because now you might end up with someone even worse. In fact, the intelligence community assessed that the IRGC, the hardline Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is likely to, at least in the short term, fill that power void.
Yeah, I mean, we can't emphasize this enough, and this is clear from every one of your answers. We have so many unanswered questions, and we don't know what comes next. Natasha, David, and Barak, thank you so much for being here. Up next, Democratic senator breaks with his party and says that President Trump's attack on Iran is, quote, right and necessary.
I'm Will Ripley in Taipei, Taiwan, and this is CNN.
I'm David Culver in Wuhan, China.
CNN Seoul,
Hong Kong,
Istanbul,
in Athens, Greece,
in Copenhagen, Denmark,
In London, and this is CNN.
I'm Kylie Atwood at the State Department, and this is CNN.
Welcome back to State of the Union. Democrats are demanding lawmakers return here to Washington and hold a vote on President Trump's attack on Iran, launched without congressional approval. My guest now is a Democratic senator who says he will vote no and that Trump made the right call. Here with me now is Democratic Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for being here, Senator. You are taking a very different approach than most of your fellow Democrats. You're fully behind what the president did in Iran, and you've actually been calling on him to do just this since last year. Is your support limitless if these strikes continue for weeks?
Well, of course, it's not limitless. You know, my support was that they could never allow Iran to acquire a nuclear bomb. I think every single member of the Senate says we should never allow Iran to acquire a nuclear bomb. President Trump was the guy willing to do that to make sure that didn't happen. If just putting out tweets and using harsh and strong language was effective, Iran wouldn't have been on the path to acquire a nuclear bomb. Those are the kind of things that are necessary. Now, let's never forget what Iran has done for the last 47 years in destabilizing that entire region and funding the proxies. They were behind 10/7. and to continue to do these things. So for me, finally, do you really want to have real peace? Do you really want to have real security in the middle region? So let's do that. And that's why I fully support that. So now, of course, it's not limitless. Now, have people ever read the War Powers Act? You know, what's required of the president is to provide 48 hours of notification, and then he or she have 60 days, up to 90 days to withdraw those troops, you know, before Congress approves that. Neither of those have been activated. He did provide that to the Gang of Eight, and there are no American troops on the ground now. This was an incredibly precise and successful strikes, and they eliminated most of the leadership. So here we are. So yes, I do support that. You know, why can't the entire world celebrate that he's dead for what he's done to the world?
I guess the question, Senator, is that it's not over. It's not it's not a one and done. They got the supreme leader and other members of the Iranian leadership, and now they've moved on. They're continuing. The U.S. and Israel are continuing to strike in Iran. And just in terms of the reasons for this, you gave a lot of reasons that Iran is a horrible regime and has been for 47 years, that it's done a lot of bad things across the globe. The question now is the immediate threat, and American and European intelligence sources are undercutting the president's reasoning for these strikes. He said that there was evidence that Iran was getting ready to preeminently strike, and that Iran was trying to resume enriching uranium, and that that's not necessarily true in an imminent way. What do you say to that?
Well, what is true is that President Trump tried to negotiate that and tried to find a firm kinds of agreements. You know, absolutely. And they refused to those basic kinds of things. Remind everybody, you know, you are never allowed to acquire nuclear weapons, and clearly they was. And I absolutely supported what happened last June. You know, imagine if people just listened to the conventional wisdom, you know, that they could have possibly have acquired a bomb, you know, if we weren't bombed back in June. So yeah, there is a threat. It's not imminent that can happen right now, but it's one that I think it's entirely appropriate to deal with it, and that's why I support it. So again, people keep described that it was a legal war. Now, read the War Powers Act, and now that has not been violated at this point. What happened yesterday?
Let me ask you about that, because your colleague from Kentucky, Republican Senator Rand Paul, posted, "The Constitution conferred the power to declare or initiate war to Congress for a reason, to make war less likely. My oath of office is to the Constitution. So with studied care, I must oppose another presidential war." So just to be clear, it doesn't concern you that President Trump launched these strikes. I understand that he came to the so-called Gang of Eight, the leadership and members of the Intelligence Committee. But more broadly, if these strikes continue, you don't think Congress should have a role?
First of all, who does Rand Paul agree with? He doesn't even agree with Republicans. He voted against them too now. So I really don't follow him, and I don't really use his kinds of insights in all of it. So what happened yesterday was incredibly successful. And now Iran was trying to acquire a nuclear bomb, and they have the kinds of missile technology that could inflict significant damage in Israel and our American forces as well too. Here we were, they refused to negotiate, they refused to change a different way forward. And now I fully support that. And now if you talk about the War Powers Act, that wasn't broken. Now, so that's the conversation that we're now. And I don't understand why we can't just say, thank God, no, we weren't lost any soldiers. And we were incredibly effective about destroying the Iranian leadership. And there wasn't any kind of outcry from parts of the left after Iran executed about 30,000 of their young people that were simply protesting for democracy. Why? Why can't we just objectively say what Israel has been able to accomplish, since they were calling for a ceasefire back in 2024? Hamas would be still there. Sinwar would be alive. Hezbollah would be allowed to fire thousands of rockets into Israel now too. And then now Houthis too. And Iran would be able to be perceived as a strong military presence in the region. Turns out it really wasn't effective. So here we are, we're in a much better place now. If anyone wants those things that they claim that they do, like peace, and they can never allow Iran to acquire a nuclear bomb, when someone actually did that, that could actually make sure that's possible. And I'm open to a better opportunity for more peace and prosperity for the Iranian people, for more security that Israel deserves that. So that's the point. And this was not an illegal war based on terms of what the War Powers Act is.
Senator, thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, as Iranians face an uncertain future, what do they hope will happen next?